In case that you have no idea what HTML and CSS are, you're in the right place. Because in this lecture, I'm going to very quickly go over the most important parts of HTML and CSS, just by looking at the project that we will be working on in this section. So if you're already familiar with HTML and CSS, then please feel free to mark this lecture as completed and then move on straight to the next one. This is the starter code of the project that we will be working on in this section. And this here is the HTML document. Alright, so an HTML document is what always holds the content of our web pages. In HTML, we have elements which are composed of ending tags, content, and closing tags in most of the cases. We then write these elements into one another and like this create a nested structure. And there are different elements for different things, such as links, paragraphs, images, sections, etc. For example, the div tag here has this opening tag, this closing tag, and this content here in between. And in this case, the content itself are even more HTML elements. But eventually some of these elements have some plain text content here. For example, here, or here, or here. Okay, so HTML elements can also have attributes, which are these. So this is the class attribute, the ID attribute, or for example, the source or alt attributes. And there are a lot of different attributes. Now, probably the most used one is actually the class attribute, which is this one here. And it allows us to give a certain element a name. And IDs, which we have, for example, here, also allow us to give elements a name. But the difference is that an ID has to be unique, but a class name can be used over and over again throughout the pages. For example, we have player name here and then down here again, but we have, for example, the ID name 0 only here because down here it's called name 1. Alright, so these are elements and attributes. Now about the structure of an HTML document, it is always divided into two parts, which are the header and the body. So the body is what we just looked at, and it contains the visible content of a web page. So it's basically everything that's here enclosed into these body tags. So that's it for the body. Now the header is what contains additional information about a web page, such as the title here or even some page keywords. And we can also do other things here. For example, in here we import into our code a custom font from Google Fonts and also an icon font which will give us some nice icons that we can use to make our interface look nicer. And then here in the next line, but also still in the head of the HTML document, we connect our HTML file to a CSS style sheet, which brings me to CSS. So let us open our external CSS file, which is this one here. Okay, so if HTML is the content of the web page, then CSS is the presentation. And here in the CSS, we simply write rules to style our web page. So we have all these rules here. So here and all the way. So all this file is filled with CSS rules. And the way we connect the HTML with the CSS is by using usually class names. We can also use IDs or other selectors, but the most common one is the class selector. So this is the class name that we specify in the HTML. So let's go look at that. So player name, and that is right here. So the rule that we just saw here in the CSS styles all the elements which have the class of player name. And this here is the class selector. And if we go up here, we see another selector, which, for example, we have this one here. And this is called a type selector because it selects all elements with the type of body. So it simply selects the body of our web page. And we also have the universal selector, which simply selects all of the elements on the web page and applies these styles to all of them. Okay, so I think that is actually all I had to tell you. I hope that you got a small idea about HTML and CSS now. This should absolutely be enough to allow you to follow the next lectures, where we are going to need some of these concepts. If you want a full deep dive training into HTML and CSS, then you can of course try out my other course, which is called Build Responsive Real-World Websites with HTML5 and CSS3.